Well, good morning. I understand you guys have been having some problems there with wind and electricity. Many of you have not had electricity for part of the week. So, hey, you may not see this at all. If there's not electricity at the church on Sunday, or if you have trouble getting it to Al. But recording it on this end has also not been without its challenges, one of which is finding a quiet place, or a relatively quiet place, in a house with 4 grandchildren, although we're enjoying that time. And of course, the quietness is complicated by the fact that we're right near a train track and in the flight path of a major airport. So, and there's a cat around here that keeps meowing, so if you get some noises that you aren't sure about while I'm talking, well, we're just trying to make this work. Anyway, welcome to week 2. We're looking at how to love your wife like Christ loved the church. And we are not making any case that that's easy. There's a lot to it. Our thesis is that a man has a pastoral responsibility to love his wife with unconditional, self-sacrificing, sanctifying delight. This week we're looking at the unconditional and self-sacrificing aspect of that statement, and wanted to start by just a brief review of last week in case you weren't here or in case you can't remember. So, we're in the Ephesians passage that deals with the fact that the husband is to love his wife like Christ loved the church, and goes on to unpack that a little bit more there in the text, and we will be doing that in the future. But right before it gets there, it says that the Christ is the head of the church and the husband is the head of the wife. And so a lot of our conversations about that passage are about that idea. What does it mean to be the head of the wife? I think unfortunately we often misunderstand that. Our imagination and our flesh jump right to I'm the boss, I'm in charge, things should be the way I want them, things should happen when I want them to happen, sort of king of the house kind of an idea. But the Ephesians 5 passages, when it talks about headship, is talking less about being the boss and more about being the leader. And all of us know that there's a difference between having a boss or a manager and having someone who's a leader, someone who we respect, someone whose ideas matter to us and who we are more cheerfully responsive to, if we want to put it that way. So, anyway, given the way that the text that's used here in the text in Ephesians 5, particularly following those verses when it goes back to the notion of Christ, the head in the body, we've already seen that twice in the book of Ephesians before we even get to this text. So when it says head, it's clearly thinking about the head-body relationship. It says earlier that God had given all things to Christ as the head, and then it also says that He, as our head, is edifying, building up the body in love, those kinds of things in chapter 4. So here we are in chapter 5 and thinking about what it means to be the head. And there are many metaphors in the Bible that we explore that help us understand the kind of leadership that's in view here. A servant leader, an advocate, an elder brother. But the one that's probably the most helpful, and the one we will focus our attention on, is the notion of being a shepherd. The same word we use for pastor. So, in looking at the idea of shepherd, and connecting it to the idea of headship, I'm just suggesting that as Christ is the chief shepherd, and as He has Himself declared to be the good shepherd, that us taking a little time to understand that will help us understand how He leads His church. So what do we know about the Good Shepherd? I'm going to start by reading the passage from John chapter 10, starting with verse 11. It says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for my sheep. So, what do we see here about Christ as the good shepherd in relationship to his flock, of which, of course, we are part? First of all, it says that he knows his sheep. I'm pretty sure there are men who don't really know their wives. Don't spend much time trying to understand them. Don't spend a whole lot of time trying to figure them out. They've decided somewhere, because some uncle or something made a joke about it, that you can't understand women and why bother. I'm glad Christ doesn't take that attitude toward us as his church. 1 Peter 3, verse 7 says that man should dwell with his wife according to knowledge. The emphasis here is on being with her so that you know her and understand her. And that's something the Good Shepherd does. He also lays his life down for the sheep. In Luke, there's the parable about the man who had 99 sheep. He lost one. He went out of his way, went to go find it. When he found it, he was grateful and glad and rejoiced and told all the neighbors about it. He'd found his sheep. Well, I don't know, you may have had 99 girlfriends, but at some point there was one you went after. And when you got her, you were glad. There's something about seeking and finding and desiring and wanting and rejoicing that's connected to this notion of being the Good Shepherd. And finally, of course, he lays down his life for the sheep. It says that in the John passage, of course. I think Ephesians 5:2 offers another insight into that. It says, walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. Notice that he didn't sacrifice himself to us, but for us. His sacrifices as are ours are to God. This is an interesting idea when we start to think about it as in terms of comparing how Christ loved the church and how husbands love their wives. I'm not sacrificing to my wife, I'm sacrificing for my wife. The sacrifice is to God. And he is pleased in such sacrifice, by such sacrifices. It is, as Ephesians 5:2 says, a fragrant offering to the Lord. Now this week our focus shifts from how he leads his church to how he loves it. I asked last week, how do we, as a church, how do we experience the headship of Christ? And I think it's a good question to ask now. As a church, how do we experience the love that Christ has for his church? And in some ways they're very similar. His leadership and his love are both steadfast, gentle, gracious. And we don't have the experience as a church, in terms of Christ's headship or his love, of being beat up by it or drained by it. If your love is such that your wife is drained by it, then you don't yet understand how Christ loved the church, and you're not loving your wife in that way. We don't experience this as something that drains us. We experience it as something that gives us joy, that gives us hope, that gives us security and certainty. This is how we experience the love that Christ has for His church, and it should be the way our wives experience our love as well. So, there are a number of passages there on your worksheet about just some ideas, and there are many more, I'm sure, about how He loves His church. There are passages about initiative, listening, forgiving, waiting, having compassion. And so we're going to pause the tape, and well, it's not a tape. We're going to pause the video and give you guys a moment to read these passages. Perhaps individuals could read each one. Perhaps you can, as a group, discuss the implications of these things. But really, I'm more interested in just what it says about Christ and how He loves the church. So let's do that.